happy Wednesday, everybody. Thank you for being here on another edition of the Route Consultant Wednesday webinars. For those of you that are here for the first time, happy to have you here. For those of you that are repeat offenders, always great to see you, not see you, but hear you. So really looking forward to today's topic and webinar this week. For those of you, again, that are new for the first time, I'm going to do just a couple quick housekeeping items. My name is Annalie Kate. I'm the Vice President here at Route Consultant. We are one of the largest FedEx ground operators, as well as the largest FedEx route brokers and consultants in the space. Do a lot of different activities within the FedEx industry, and just love being parts of this community. So this week, a couple things we're going to have is a special guest that I'm really excited about in the technology space that we're going to talk to here in just a little bit. And then we'll go over a couple of our routine traditions. Before I do anything else, I've got a quick disclaimer I'm going to read. So some of you are used to this, but Route Consultant is not endorsed by and is not recommended by Federal Express Corporation and FedEx Ground. Route Consultant is not sponsored by, is not approved by, is not associated with, and has no connection whatsoever with Federal Express Corporation or FedEx Ground. All that means is that you will not receive any material non-public information here today on the webinar, but we do hope that you receive some materially helpful information on today's webinar. For those of you that are familiar with the way we do things here at the Route Consultant webinars, is one of our big traditions is that we will cover some industry content, something that we think will be a helpful topic for you at the beginning here. And then we're going to open it up for just open Q&A session for the second half of today's session. And we will entertain questions on today's topic or anything that you want to know about within the FedEx industry. A couple important notes on that is when you go to submit a question that you'd like covered today, if you'll do me a favor and make sure that you are using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen and not using the chat feature. It's just much easier for us to only have to manage one. So please use that Q&A button. I will be screening those questions and making sure that we try to get as many answered as we possibly can today. So another thing that you'll know if you are a repeat offender of our weekly webinars is that in order to ask a question on our webinars, you have to also answer a question. So this is a tradition we have here. It's a chance for you to learn a little bit more about us, about our guests, and also for us to learn some more about you. And it just really makes things fun. So this week's question is a funny one. It's going to be, what is your big pet peeve? So what's that one thing that always is going to get your attention somewhere, somehow, that's causing some sort of pet peeve for you. So if that's the case, then you have one. We would love to hear about it today. If you're as laid back as they get and you don't have a pet peeve, that's totally fine too. But you do need to respond to that question, and we're going to prioritize anybody that answers that question when we're going through to choose which questions we cover in the Q&A session today. So before we get started with our guest, one other important thing I want to do is cover the inventory that went live today on our public site. So the opportunities that went live from our private consulting client only site were St. Petersburg, Florida. We had 5 line haul runs go live at 1.15 million. So solid EBITDA margins on those. It's 4 dedicated solo runs and 1 unassigned run. And essentially that can be a great starting point for somebody coming in because you've got a good portfolio of dedicated, consistent mileage, but you also have that unassigned opportunity, which lets you typically carry that extra driver resource, but also be able to pivot that driver over in an emergency or contingency situation to one of those dedicated lanes. So love that for a first-time line haul buyer in St. Petersburg, Florida, not the worst place in the world to be operating line haul. We also have in Ocala, Florida this week, 2 line haul runs listed at $5.99. Those are 2 unassigned team runs, so a little bit different. This is definitely an entry point into the market as a way to kind of get your foot in the door and work those 2 unassigned teams. On the P&D side, we've got Birmingham, Alabama, 9 P&D routes listed at $3.29. That's only 33% of revenue on that one. So it's priced incredibly low for the amount of actual revenue you'd be acquiring there in Birmingham. Lots of spare drivers on that one too. So it's kind of poised for somebody looking to do some contingency work or something in that nature. And the last one I had for you this week is Chicago, Illinois. We had 12 P&D routes listed at 915,000. That's only 68% of revenue on that one. So also below typical market valuations. That one comes with 3 spare trucks, has a manager in place, and is a really low mileage territory CSA. So lots of different opportunities for you to check out there. Keep checking in every week for new opportunities. We have anywhere from 5 to 10 or 15 depending on the week. So keep checking out for that new inventory. But that's what we had go live this week. So that brings me to the highlight is we're going to go ahead and bring our guest on. So today on our session, we have Kelly Garcia with Beans Route. And she's going to be here to talk about a topic that both our consulting clients and buyers and current Fedex contractors come to us with questions about this very topic all the time. And it's essentially when looking at technology providers, how do I know what I'm even looking at in the space? What are some of those important questions that I should ask to try to figure out what technology solutions I need or are the right fit for me? So I'm so excited to have her here to tell you a little bit more about that side of the business. So Kelly, thank you again for being here. And I will turn it over to you. And after you hear from Kelly, you're going to hear answers to the question of the day for myself and also for Kelly. Again, that question is, what is your big pet peeve? And then we'll go into open Q&A. So take it away, Kelly.
Thank you for having me. It's nice to see you guys again. Granted, we just saw each other a week ago, I think. So I love it. Let's see. So pet peeves, I do have a couple. One of them is when you're getting off the elevator and people immediately just start to try and get on without letting you get off.
That's so good.
That drives me crazy. The people get off and then the new people get on. I know it's simple, but it drives me crazy. So that's personally my pet peeve. Hopefully some of you all are not the offenders of that one.
I don't know. It could be me. Have you ever seen, this is one of my favorite funny pranks, but have you ever seen the videos where people get on the elevator and they get on the elevator and they don't turn around and they face the back wall? Have you ever seen those videos? It's hysterical. It's like a prank people pull. They just walk into the elevator and they don't turn around. They just face the wall. It is the funniest thing if you watch. So go watch those videos. But anyways, that's my elevator reference for that one.
Interesting. I will have to check that out.
Yeah. So I'll tell you my pet peeve at the end. So go ahead and tell us a little bit about the tech side, Kelly.
So my name is Kelly Garcia. I work for, I'm head of sales here for Beans Route. So we are a route optimization partner. We are FedEx ground approved. And we have a lot of other partners in the space so that we can provide essentially an all encompassing solution for our clients with lytics, with lytics for vetter, safety, compliance, routing, time cards, and all that fun stuff that is hot topics right now that are required. So we do kind of all of that pieces, all those parts and pieces.
Awesome.
And do you want me to go into kind of the training for today?
Yeah, bring it on. We're super excited. Like I said, I get these questions all the time. So for everyone to have that kind of one stop place to say, what are the important questions for me to ask is something that I think is going to be hugely popular.
Absolutely. I think right now too, there's so much movement in the FedEx ground space. We're seeing folks break off pieces. The brokerage, as you know, is booming. And so we've got a lot of new folks coming into the FedEx ecosystem, and they're looking at things a little bit more fresh and saying, hey, I don't care really what who I'm purchasing, what they were doing. I really want to evaluate all the parts and pieces. And where do I start? And so I think it would be really beneficial to talk about some of the questions you should ask any routing solution that you're essentially interviewing to partner with moving forward. It's a major thing. You're dating and then you got to get married, right? It's not so easy to break up when you implement a solution. So my goal is really to arm folks with the information needed so that you can ask good questions and really get to the bottom of, did I suss this out correctly? And am I going to be happy with the decision I made? So some of them are the first part is about hardware. Right. I think it's important when you're looking at a routing provider is what kind of hardware is required, right? Is there anything I have to purchase to run my routing application on, whether it's a computer or any devices? And then, what does it run on? So how many different ways can we access this? How can the drivers access the application? Is it an app? Where does the app go, right? And how can our managers, our BCs, the AOs access this application? Is it web-based? Is it, an app? And where do they get that? So I think those are critical. Once you understand how you can access it and what hardware requirements you have, then you can start to hone in on, okay, what is the outlay on that? I think the next thing is pricing. It's super important to get a pricing quote. Every vendor out there should easily be able to get you a pricing quote. If they spend a few minutes with you, understanding, how many work areas are you typically running? Me personally, I like to ask, how many work areas are you running on a Friday? That to me gives a really good level of where your operation is, because we know Sundays would not be the best benchmark for that. Is there a data subscription, right? What's my commitment? Is there a data subscription for the devices we need to purchase? What does that look like? How many of those do we need? Who do we get those from? Is there a contract? How do I pay for this? Is it monthly? Can I cancel? I think those are, all solid questions, and do you offer a free trial, right? Can we try before we buy? I think that's always important. I've never purchased a car that I didn't test drive first. So it's a little test drive, right? Let's make sure that what you can do, you do. And then finally, back to that, can you give me a pricing quote? And not just a pricing quote for one piece, get me a pricing quote that is going to list out, how many work areas I have, how many drivers I have, that's specific to my organization. What can I expect my monthly outlay to be? Everything I have to commit to, whether that's, the data subscription, the routing subscription, safety, vetter, all of it. Let me see it all in one place so I can see what my monthly outlay is.
That's awesome. Yeah, I have so many questions on that part that we get from clients that we're working with. And, it's interesting. So with consulting clients, but also with a lot of current contractors that are, used to using particular solutions, or maybe they're still using DRO because, their team feels like they know the territory really well, and they're not necessarily thinking, adding some sort of route optimization solution is going to be necessary. When they start realizing that, I think the vast potential of what it can do from an optimization standpoint, one of the biggest questions I get is, what are all of the pieces of software or all the parts of the pricing that I'm going to need, and how can I kind of knock it all out without having to piecemeal and do, a ton of additional follow-up research. So I think it's such a great question in trying to flesh that out and understand that piece of it, Kelly. So that's super helpful. I think also too, just before we jump into open Q&A, would you talk a little bit about kind of that onboarding experience too, Kelly, of, when contractors are coming into the space to register with a product like yours, or if it's a new contractor that's looking for the first time, what are some of the questions that they should really ask to understand what that transition, that setup, that onboarding experience would be like?
That's a great question. So, as most of you potentially know, when you are a new contractor, stand-ups are always on Saturdays, which are fun for everybody. So with that being on a Saturday, there are some things that can happen. We've got to make sure that the right FedEx IDs are syncing with FedEx, and that sometimes doesn't happen. So it's so critical to create, with whatever vendor you go through, create a plan. We always will sit down with you and say, okay, what's your stand-up date? We have all the information, and we create a kind of almost like a project timeline of what we need to do to ensure that everything's not crazy that Saturday, because it's very easily a little nutty. Everybody's showing up. It's like, wait, who are you? Maybe they know, maybe they don't know. Yeah. So we really like to get our ducks in a line. That being said, things that you should ask, I think, are critical is, how long will it take for us to be completely fully up and running on your software, right? If I commit today, what does that look like? What's our path? What's the cost of that? And understanding, hey, if I sign up today, but I'm not going live for 2 weeks, am I paying for your services for those 2 weeks, even though we're really not using them? We're just getting our ducks in a row. So I think that's important to understand. How long does it take to train a driver on your software, right? Is this something that we're going to be dealing with for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a few hours? How long does it take to get a BC trained and up and running on your software? Do you do terminal visits? We really believe in terminal visits. So make sure that they're willing to come and see you, and spend time with you face to face and literally interact with your drivers to say, hey, this is how this works, or let me answer this question, or hey, that's great feedback. And finally, like, what support am I going to get on my stand-up date? Because it is a Saturday. Are you guys working? Who's working? Who's there to support us? And so, those I think are very healthy things to ask for, and make sure that you get your needs met on that, so that you're not left in a lurch and kind of trying to fend for yourself on a Saturday morning. That doesn't sound like fun to anybody.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah. Stand-up day is, that's always one that is full of eventful stories. We try to make it as smooth as we can for people, but it is always an important milestone day for sure. So anything you can do ahead of time to try to minimize last minute pieces, making sure that you have those fuel cards, making sure that you've got employee onboarding paperwork ready to go, so that you're not, hustling to try to do e-verify the next day or whenever, just so you can get that stuff behind you, direct deposit information. Just having all of that ready for day one, having those software pieces set up and in place, it's really going to change what that day feels like, because you want to be able to enjoy that experience as much as you can enjoy the chaos of it, but you want to be able to enjoy kind of the gravity of closing on a business and taking over, getting to know your team a little bit. So it's definitely anything you could do to minimize that, no doubt. So, well, cool. Well, I know we probably have some other things we're going to jump in and talk about too, but I want to go ahead and ask a couple questions. And one of them, I think that feeds into something that I think will be beneficial that you could speak to, Kelly, here, is actually from Jay Mays. And I guess before I do that, I haven't answered the question of the day myself really quick. So let me do this. So my pet peeve, that my dad instilled this in me early, is when people drive slow in the left lane, because you're supposed to drive in the right lane and use the left lane for passing. So that, especially when there's nobody else around, it's like, this is literally what causes traffic, people. Like, you need to drive in the right lane and pass in the left lane. So if you want to see like sweet Tennessee Annalie get super feisty, I will go Danica Patrick for sure, which is probably dangerous to say in like a transportation webinar, but yeah, they would probably not let me drive, but it's definitely a huge pet peeve of mine. So I will share that one, but I want to ask this question from Jay Mays, and I want to speak to this a little bit and then pass it to you, Kelly, to talk about this too. Is first of all, Jay's pet peeve is Jay's is guys, this is guys that can't hit the urinal. Girls, we don't typically have that problem. So I cannot relate to that one at all, Jay, but that is funny. So I didn't know what we would get today, but that is funny. So the question from Jay is, if he has two entities in a terminal and wants to share or exchange drivers between those entities on occasion, how is that accomplished? And do you have to have both drivers on both companies' payroll, or how does that work? So this is a bit of a broader conversation, but I want to cover this because I've actually had a lot of questions on this lately, and there's some really important compliance things that I'm seeing coming up in audits right now, and that I'm seeing contractors just struggling with challenges or trying to map through this process. So the first important part of this is that the big kicker depends on whether the volume that driver is going to be delivering is under, let's say, you as the primary operator that normally employs them, because it's being subcontracted over to you, or if you're just loaning that driver to another organization and they are still going to be running that volume. So that's kind of important distinction number one. This is a bit of a kind of, it can get sticky. And here's what I would say is, you want to try to minimize this, because it just can create kind of clerical problems within the organization that I see people make mistakes that end them up, in the negative side of an audit. But ultimately it comes down to who the driver is logging into the scanner under has to pay the payroll for that day. Okay. So again, if that work is being subcontracted over to that other, to you essentially from that operator, then you would have the driver log into the scanner under your organization, and you would cut their paycheck for the day, and that revenue would come to you via your settlement. Okay. The flip side would be if the contractor that you are loaning your driver to is still going to receive the settlement revenue, and you've basically just worked out a side arrangement that says, let me loan you a driving resource, then that driver needs to log into the scanner under that entity, and that entity has to pay their payroll if you do it that way. Okay. And really kind of the if it's within the same terminal, typically it's as simple as just having them log into that scanner. If this is related to, so we've talked about, just loaning drivers, we've talked about contingency work, I'm sorry, subcontracting. Now we want to talk about contingency work. So if it's a scenario where FedEx has reached out to you to run contingency for another contractor, again, slight distinction, and oftentimes I see this happen out of terminal in another terminal. In those scenarios, again, the driver's going to log in under your scanner, you're going to cut their payroll, you're going to receive that settlement revenue, plus it's going to be contingency revenue, which only happens when it's actually via FedEx as opposed to just subcontracted through the other CSP. In that scenario, you will have to typically actually go into MyGroundBiz and transfer to be able to associate those drivers with another station. If you're running contingency in that station, they won't be able to log into the scanners usually if you haven't actually associated or shared that driver file with that other terminal to be able for them to access the scanner. So if you run into issues with the driver saying, hey, I can't log in to my scanner from that other location because I'm doing contingency work, it's typically because that driver's file has not been shared from their domiciled station over to the new station. I know this is a super complicated topic, but it's one I'm seeing a ton of issues with right now. And really, I think what is especially key, and I've seen this really burn some really great contractors lately unintentionally, is that when the drivers have issues with that logging into the scanner challenges, what I can see happen is they will log in under another driver, and they'll basically just pretend to be somebody else for that day. And that can create huge liability problems. So that's what you really have to watch out for, is that the drivers that are actually running for you or running for another contractor are logging in under the scanner for themselves and not for another driver. The drivers don't realize the implications of this, but if they run under another driver and you cut them a paycheck, it's going to show in an audit that you did not pay whoever shows as having run that day. Plus it's an integrity issue, and everything about that is just something you want to stay a million miles away from as an operator. So it's a really important question, and you've got to follow the letter of the law on how you're handling those driver handoffs. And sometimes the easiest way to follow that is just don't do it. But if it's going to happen, if you need to do it, you've got to follow those clerical protocols to make sure it happens smoothly. So the one question I wanted to now kind of flip over to you, Kelly, to talk about is how does that work on, first of all, being able to add drivers easily or, take them in and out of the system? How does that work in terms of associating drivers with your entity if you want them to be able to access your software for a day?
That's a great question. So it sounds to me like Jay, and just reading the question, was that it's both of his entities. Is that a reasonable?
Yeah, well, when it's in the same terminal, it's going to be two separate entities. It may be like a close friend or something like that, if that's what he's getting at within that terminal, but it's got to be two separate entities, two separate operators.
Okay, agreed. But they could have a partnership, whatever the case may be, let's call it what it is. So if, with the way we are set up, we have folks that have multiple entities, and they're all syncing under one Beans route account. And so we just can enter in a million different FedEx IDs separated by a comma. Mm-hmm. So theoretically, they could already be under one umbrella in Beans route, and that's not a problem. Otherwise, it's super easy to add somebody on the fly and send them out for the day. It's we can work however you need to within the constraints that you need to.
Okay, yeah, and it sounds like it's just like if this is a friendly, friendly neighborhood contractor in another building or in the same building even, how do I do it? So it's easy for them to just upload those drivers and add them to the dashboard. Is that right?
Yeah, we just you just got to add driver, name, email, phone, FedEx ID, boom. They can download the app, log in, they see their route, and they're ready to roll in about 3 minutes, maybe.
Nice, nice, awesome. The next question I've got is from Josh Davis, whose question is, first of all, his pet peeve, and I can appreciate this one too, Josh, is when people drive slow on the road because they're texting while they drive. You're right there in my road rage category, Josh. So I'm so with you on that. When you look over and they're like, or when they're like weaving a little bit in and out of the lanes, and like, yeah, my Karen comes out big time, and I'm like, hey, you better get in that lane. So I can really appreciate that, Josh. And Josh's question is, if you are the AO, but not a driving AO of your entity, can you still do ride-alongs with your drivers or with your BC? I can take this one. So absolutely yes. So essentially, when you do your initial person request with FedEx Ground, you're going to be put under that distinction of either a driving AO or a non-driving AO. And if you choose non-driving AO, it's effectively like being a helper in FedEx's system. So a helper is somebody that's not approved to drive, but they are approved to be on a truck. So yes, you can absolutely still do ride-alongs as a helper or non-driving AO, Josh. All right, so next question is from Matthew Furr, who said, by the way, hi ladies, thanks for the time today. Appreciate that, it sounded super suave. And the question from Matthew is, or his pet peeve is, when you meet somebody for the first time and their first question is, what do you do for a living? Oh man. Okay, so here's what I'm going to say about that. And you tell me what you think, Kelly. So I totally do this because I'm so obsessed with my job. I just want them to ask me the same thing. And it's really annoying to like my friends and family now when we go out. So I'm going to have to take this and put it in my recommendation jar, Matthew, because I totally do this because I'm like, so what do you do? Oh, cool. But let me tell you about what I do. I don't know if you've heard of FedEx routes, but they are awesome. So yeah, anyways, I don't know. Kelly, do you do that?
Honestly, I try to learn a little bit with like casual conversation, but when these people, the person maybe doesn't have a lot to say, and Matthew, I am not saying you're that person. I promise. Like sometimes I'll be like, so what do you do? Like trying to get a conversation going. But there are some people that's like the first thing they say. Yeah. And I love what I do. So for me, I'm like, well, I am, but I get it.
My husband always gives me a hard time. He calls me a social terrorist. He's like, no, you cannot walk into the room and say that, honey. So I'm like, okay. But that's a great one. I think that's a very, very legit. He said he just says as little as possible when he meets somebody new. So that's an introvert for you. And if you can tell, Kelly and I are not introverts even a little bit, either one of us. So, but his question, Kelly, is, if you pick a product like Beams Route or Velociter, is that a scenario where you can remove ground cloud and DRO, or does there have to be some sort of duplicity in what solutions you have? So I think he's really just trying to understand what the options are in terms of what functions some of these different names we hear are. And I guess I'll just do a quick reference here for DRO if you're not familiar with that one. It stands for Dynamic Route Optimization, and if you're new to the space, that actually is the FedEx provided optimization solution versus the other names, but I'll let you take that one, Kelly.
Perfect. So there's no getting rid of DRO. That, like Annalie said, it's dynamic route optimization. And so ultimately what DRO does, for those of you that maybe don't fully understand it, is when the trucks come in and they unload all the packages, they take all the packages and then with their software then create routes out of all the packages, if you will. So what ends up happening is based on how a contractor has their DRO set up, in the morning, it will spit out essentially routes that then go to all of the routing providers post DRO, which would be myself and our competitors like Velociter and Ground Cloud and all those others. So you can't get rid of DRO, but we are we are obviously competitors of the other ones. So if you go with us, then you would be eliminating one of the others.
Got it. Super helpful. Yeah, the DRO piece, it definitely, like, I think there's some complement to it, but it is a FedEx solution that, you know, I think we just rolled it out a little early from that perspective. And so we've found generally, having a complementary solution is pretty critical. So.
And on a side note of that, we actually have our own DRO for our non-FedEx clients. And so that's also something that we can do with some of our clients is, do some analysis to say, hey, maybe you need to set yours up a little bit better. And we can eliminate these routes and this overhead and things like that from a consulting standpoint.
Next question is from Juan Salgado, who's, this is a really good one. His pet peeve is people standing up in a plane before it has completely stopped. I support that one completely. We do a lot of traveling here, and it's like, you're not going to get off any faster. And then especially, okay, I'm sorry, I'm taking it too far, but the people that stand up on the two inside seats, so they're like standing like this, it's like, that cannot be more comfortable for you. Like, I can get it if you're the end person and you want to stretch your back out, but that cracks me up when people are like, I'm standing.
It drives me crazy, especially when you're in like aisle 15 and aisle 2 hasn't even left yet. Yeah. And 15 standing here next to me. And then they look at me like, do you want to go? Like, I can't get in the aisle. My bag's up here.
Yeah.
Where am I going to go?
That's right. Or when it gets to be your turn and then like this person who's been standing is like, I'm just going to go. And it's like, what is happening? It's wild. Yeah. So Juan's question, Kelly, is, can we talk a little bit about hours of service, essentially, so the under 10,000 pound, over 10,000 pound regulations for how to deal with overtime. So definitely this has been a really hot topic on audit compliance, and probably something we can talk about too is actually time tracking on this. But from an audit perspective and under or over 10,000 pounds, so in most states, if your vehicle is over 10,000 pounds, you participate in a commercial vehicle exemption that says you do not have to pay overtime to drivers who are operating that vehicle. If your vehicle is under 10,000 pounds, then you do have to pay overtime to those drivers. And it's super tricky because even if they work an entire week, if they do 1 hour even in that under 10,000 pound vehicle, because they just go run in your BC's cargo van for a minute, that whole week is overtime eligible. And so I see people make this mistake all the time on audits where they're not calculating the overtime, or they're just assuming kind of an 8-hour block of time for a full day of work, and they really pay in like a fixed daily wage, and so they're just not making the appropriate adjustments for that overtime compensation. So that is a big one. Now there are, and some of this is even recent, some states where under or over 10,000 pounds, you're out of luck. You're going to have to pay overtime for that. Hashtag New York. So
California.
Yeah, that's right. That's where you are. So, a couple of those states. So it's really important that you consult a wage and hour attorney in your state and really understand what the requirements are and what commercial exemptions might exist for your state. But this is a really big deal, and kind of getting into some of the time tracking pieces of this too that can be particularly challenging. Is it's really important that you're tracking hours for your drivers in order not just to handle overtime and of course to be compliant with hours of service for DOT, but from an audit perspective, you've really also got to be tracking those hours for your drivers, and even more so is making sure that the hours tracking solution you're using is going to be compliant and it's going to capture all the right hours tracking data and not just a piece of that driver's activity. But do you want to touch on that a little bit, Kelly, in terms of hours tracking and how that typically integrates into some of these software solutions?
Absolutely. I think a lot of the routing partners at this point have some form of timekeeping. So I think it's important for you to find out how their timesheets and scheduling works, how you track hours, what reporting you can get out in the event of an audit. Because Annalie, I'll let you correct me if I'm incorrect here, but for an audit, you do need to provide the clock in time, the clock out time, and the hours worked, both out of a third-party system. And that needs to also reflect on the pay stubs as well. So, make sure that they can adhere to that. We have separate reports just for an audit that you can pull on your own versus the ones you're probably going to use every day. But you can pull any of them at any time. It's up to you. So I think it's important definitely to find out what you're looking like if you were to get audited to ensure that you'd be okay.
Yeah, it's a great point, and you are correct in that. And this is one that I see a lot of people make this mistake depending on kind of the solution that they're using for hours tracking. Is a lot of solutions kick in, automatically when the ignition starts. And so you want to just find the right workaround here to make sure that you're getting that clock in as soon as your driver sets foot at the terminal, and as soon as they set foot out of the security guard shack, basically at the terminal. You can't wait to start the time clock on the punch in, punch out until they're in the vehicle, headed out on the road, because sometimes they've spent like 1 to 2 hours already at the terminal. Hopefully they're not spending 2 hours, but sometimes that's the case. And so it's really important that you're monitoring that closely and keeping up with that data to be compliant on that audit piece. I see that pretty frequently, so that's an important part too. And that's always something too. I think with what you were just talking on, Kelly, too, is important in terms of what you're submitting when you actually get that audit. That's awesome that you guys actually have a separate report. I didn't know that. That's specifically for the audit that shows the right relevant information there. That's something we're always kind of happy to help review when you do get notified you got an audit. You can always reach out to. We can make sure that what you're submitting is really all the right reporting and the critical pieces, because it can be a scary, overwhelming, intimidating experience, but it doesn't have to be. Those routine audits don't have to be scary, but it's more about making sure what you're doing is compliant before you actually get to the audit, as opposed to waiting until you've been pulled for an audit and you've been doing something in violation, you don't realize it. So, and then a question here from Scott Gilchrist, whose pet peeve is people who litter. That is awesome. And for the littering component, so the piece here is, his question is, what is the best accepted way by FedEx to track time to be compliant? And, do you want to touch on that, Kelly? Or you want me to grab that one?
I'll start and then you can kind of sprinkle in, but ultimately they want it to be a third party, and they want it to be a physical clock in and clock out. They don't want it to be based off the scanner, an ignition start, anything like that. They want it to be with physical activity. We all know that's a little hard to achieve and stay on top of with having folks manually clock in and clock out. So I think giving them as tools so that it's in their hand is going to be the easiest and get them into that rhythm. But those are my understandings. I don't know if I don't think there's any one way to do it. I think if you can meet those metrics, then that's all that matters.
That's exactly what I was going to say. So there's not like this is the number one way. It's about making sure that the way you're tracking it is compliant. So it's a great question, Scott. And actually, while we're touching on this one too, Kelly, if you want to touch on this, we get a lot of questions on just compliance in general as we're thinking about these FedEx audits. And, what are some of those required services that typically when you're looking at those tech vendors, you want to ask those questions and make sure that those solutions exist in order to be compliant with, with FedEx requirements?
Great question. So I think it is important. Everybody has to have better. We all know that, or Vita, or whatever you want to call it. I call it better. It's that hot button item. Which one are you?
In Tennessee, it's Vita, but yeah.
Vita. See, I don't care which way you go. I say better, whatever. But you want to make sure that your routing partner can have a direct connection to your vetter partner, right? And so that way, what you're seeing is that they will automatically assign events for you. So that takes away from office time that nobody needs to kind of have that extra overhead. And then, safety. Does your safety compliance, tie in with your routing? Can you see your safety status in your routing provider? Can this all be one healthy ecosystem? So it's very important to pick the folks that work together, and even scanner vendors. We are partnered with Peak Technologies. And so Beans Route is available on any Peak Technology scanner if you want it on there. So theoretically, the entire ecosystem, depending on who you partner with, is encompassing with us. And so whomever you choose, I think it's important to find that ecosystem that works the best for you.
Yeah, that's right. While we're on compliance here too and requirements, I've got Jay Singh asking this question. I'm going to go ahead and give it to you. I don't see a pet peeve in here, Jay. But his question is, a few weeks ago, Spencer covered on a webinar that referenced some of the upcoming vehicle requirements that could be, compliant or applicable as early as May 2022. Wants to know kind of what we see for, that's the FCAM and the lane departures specifically is what he's referencing there, and wants to know how do we see that affecting valuations with some of those vehicle exchanges. And this is a great question, Jay, and I definitely think that it's going to be part of the conversation. So I think a couple things are happening where a lot of the vehicle vendors are talking about retrofitting solutions that currently, it's not available, but they're thinking by, I know some of these upcoming deadlines that there's going to be some retrofitting solutions that may exist that might help solve for some of this. But I think it's definitely going to be a challenge. And I think it could absolutely have some implications on valuation just for the fleet itself. The important part here is that these vehicles, have a great kind of third party market too, where there's still important value in it. And, with the vehicle requirements there, unless there is a change of the Schedule B, which is going to happen in your traditional asset sale when you're making an acquisition, those vehicles are, essentially kind of grandfathered in as long as they're not coming on or off the Schedule B. So I think that could also have some implications around how people approach these sales. But as those restrictions continue to come down and those deadlines approach, if there's not retrofitting technology or solutions available, I think it's definitely going to have an impact, not on the valuations of the business or the routes, but potentially of the fleet for sure. And so it's definitely a great question. It's going to be something that's really interesting to watch in the months and years ahead. Let's see. And the next question's from William Lasher, who said, nervous flyers kill my vibe. That's so funny. And he said, hey, Kelly and Annalie, thanks for the topic. Prospective investor recently completed the Fedex 101 course and wants to know, so on kind of repair and maintenance metrics. So he's curious on, after everything else, what is typical repair and maintenance percentage strategies and what's an average net margin on these businesses? And also wants to know okay, so here's a little more to that question. So I'll just cover all of this in one fell swoop. Is in that 10 to 20% that he saw for repair and maintenance cost, how much of that is allocated towards Capex? So I'm going to back up and go to the beginning here on this question, William. It's a great question. Lots of important pieces here. So part one is typical repair and maintenance strategy. So for the P&D side and pretty close for the line haul side too, but that total repair and maintenance and rental cost should have you no higher than that 10 to 15% metric. When I start seeing a business that's, hovering in those 15% repair and maintenance cost items, that's a fleet strategy question we need to jump on really quickly because something is probably broken. So, depending on a brand new fleet, you're going to be in like a 3 to 5% range, depending on the mileage of the territory, and kind of average in that 6 to 8%. But when you start climbing into that, 11, 12, 13, up to 15%, we're probably definitely talking fleet strategy. But in that, that is not including a Capex valuation. So that 10 to 15% number is pure repair, maintenance, and rental trucks, which rentals, you don't want those to be part of your regular fleet strategy. That really needs to be exclusively a peak season solution. But for the kind of the rest of that on the Capex piece, it's not factored into that. Capex is something that's typically handled after that kind of EBITDA net operating income is determined. And on the Capex piece, based on the size of your business, and some of that is fleet strategy too, whether you go with like a long-term lease solution or you purchase vehicles. But typically, we would say somewhere between $50,000 and $75,000, and that's for kind of an average $700,000 to $1 million revenue business is kind of a good annual Capex allocation to make for standard growth. There's going to be interesting years like last year and a COVID year where these businesses skyrocketed and grew by, 100% in a lot of markets. And so in those scenarios, you definitely see some more serious kick up and pain in the Capex side, but obviously it comes with a whole lot of additional revenue and profitability. But that's kind of a good general thing to keep in mind. And then that net margin for the P&D side is usually about 15 to 25% is typical for a P&D business. Real quick on the line haul, oftentimes you can see a slightly higher fleet cost strategy. We're really big on pushing those long-term leases for the line haul side for sure. And now that that's becoming available in the P&D side, that as well in P&D. But the question here is, or the piece with line haul is those margins, depending on whether it's team or solo, can really fluctuate a lot, from 18% all the way up to 45% for the line haul side, depending on if it's team runs or solo runs. And then your Capex is obviously a lot higher. So as you keep up with that kind of 10-20% growth trajectory within the businesses, and line haul, again, a little different, it doesn't have that same organic expansion. You have to bid and be awarded those runs, but your Capex cost on a tractor is closer to about 130,000 per tractor that you're acquiring there as you grow and bid on additional runs. So hopefully that answered your question. Let's see, and he was just giving a quick clarification that average net margin before Capex would be 10 to 20%. So I'd say about 15 to 25% on that. And then he said, then you have 10% reserved for Capex per year. So yeah, I would say it's about 15 to 25. And then that Capex is going to be, I would say, just crunching the numbers on that. So 10% of $1 million would be 100 grand. So you're a little less than that. So you're probably about 7% Capex cost, just percentage wise. And again, that's if you're going with a new fleet strategy acquisition approach. But then if you're, going with like a long-term lease solution, that's why we've been looking at that a lot and heavily pivoting our fleet to those long-term leases, because you really cut down that Capex component to it, because you're not putting all that cash out up front, but you're still fixing that repair and maintenance line item at that, somewhere between 8 and 15%, depending on the structure there. So that's one thing to look at, but it can absolutely, have a major impact on that operating income if you're looking at it post Capex. And I'm again kind of going down a rabbit hole here. So for those of you that are new for the first time, like, oh my gosh, she's making it sound so complicated. Please just continue to engage with us, because the more you hear this stuff, the simpler it will start to feel. But it's a huge reason why in a lot of the content and education we talk about, these businesses, especially when we're talking to current contractors, is helping them understand that, these businesses are no longer really like an operating income vessel as kind of the primary method of income generation. These are equity building businesses, because with the growth rate in the industry and the ability to, and kind of the encouraged approach of carving out a piece of that business and doing that resale, and then being able to essentially bid on contingency opportunities. This is an equity game and not so much an operating income game, but happy to go more in depth in that one kind of offline. William, if you have more questions, please just reach out to our team and engage with us, and happy to talk more about that. So appreciate the follow-up commentary there. All right, let's see. Next question comes from Catherine, whose pet peeve is, let's see, as a former resident of New York City, people who do not understand personal space bubbles. Okay, I'm terrible at this one too. Man, I'm like that pet peeve person. I'm just realizing this is why Spencer gives me a hard time apparently every week, Kelly, is I'm like literally the pet peeve person. So my team gives me a hard time for this too. My love language is touch. And so I'm like hug everybody, high five about everything. Like I just can't shake that personality attribute. So, and I'm pretty sure so some of you have had the expo, like, I'm going to hug you. It's just how I roll. But are you a personal space person, Kelly, or what's your?
I'm a hugger.
Okay.
So I'm totally a hugger, but when I don't know somebody, I give them a good amount of personal space when we're talking. But yeah, I'm a big time hugger. So I kind of teeter on, oh Lord, she's coming in, and giving space to have a conversation.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. That's great. I'm just like, as I know, every time I see you live and in person at an event, I'm like, Kelly. So that's awesome. So Catherine's question is, could we explain pros and cons of buying businesses without trucks as a first acquisition? So it's a great question. And I think they're relatively straightforward in that the pro of buying a business without a fleet that comes with it is that you're not inheriting anybody else's problems. So, anytime you're buying used vehicles, I say this to consulting clients all the time, is that when you buy a used fleet, even if it's low mileage in a new truck, if somebody has not been adequately maintaining that vehicle and changing the oil and servicing that vehicle, then you might as well be buying a 40-year-old lemon, because it's all about how it's taken care of. So you're just getting no unknowns when you go into a business without that. I think kind of cons of buying the business without that fleet is there's a couple pieces here. Is one, being able to source a complete fleet and have it show up and be ready to go, branded, road ready, day one of a transfer in and of itself is a bit of a feat in terms of timing that. It can totally be done, but you've got to have really good support from your truck vendor in making that happen. The second piece of that is in the actual integration of that new fleet into the operation. So if I'm a driver and I'm used to driving a particular vehicle that has essentially been my office for the last, 1, 2, 5 years, and you show up day one and tell me this is my new ride, there is a culture shock. And if you've decided that a P1000 is what you want, but I'm used to driving a P700, I may not be road tested to drive a P1000. So there's definitely a lot of actual mechanical kind of operational challenges that you can have that day one when you roll up with a brand new fleet that can be, just a little bit of a shock to the system. So I would say those are kind of some of the biggest cons. Probably the one other one I could think of doing it that way is typically when you're buying these businesses, the discount you will get off of the purchase price for purchasing it without trucks, most sellers are not willing to step down on market valuation at a proportional amount to the actual appraised value of the vehicle. So when it comes out that way, a lot of times you're getting less off the price than if you just bought it with the trucks, had a smoother transition. You still roll up with your brand new fleet, but at least you can kind of ease your drivers into it. You have all those used vehicles that can essentially serve, especially if you buy this time of year, as your peak season solution without having to pay for rental trucks during peak season. And then you can kind of choose which vehicles you would want to retain headed into the new year. After you get through peak season, you can salvage, any trucks that you don't want to keep as spares. So typically that would be kind of, I think, the ideal scenario. But it's definitely going to be case dependent on that one as to what ends up being best for that. All right, let's see. So the next question comes from, and I can't see the name on this one, but the question is, how does Beans factor in an ever-changing environment of DRO? Like, what are the strengths that you think you bring to the table when kind of DRO is constantly in flux? How does your solution pair with that? And what are your strengths in terms of working with DRO?
Absolutely. So, DRO is a tough one because all of us routing vendors get the data after DRO has made its decisions. That being said, there's a lot of things that you can easily do to move routes around, collapse routes, whether you do it in Beans or, FCC, et cetera, to reorganize it if you don't like basically the product. We also, with our enhanced mapping, and have a lot of ways that we're going to speed up your drivers. And so we can help increase stops per hour. So with our GIS capabilities, we're going to be able to help from a route optimization standpoint, probably handle any of the gaps. Additionally, we were the first routing vendor to come out with the concept of stops colored by shelf ID. So when the driver is using the Beans route app, they can physically see in colors where all their stops are. So in the event you have something that's maybe on your 1,000 shelf next to something that's on your 7,000 shelf, like, you can look at that. And so visually you can look at our app and say, hey, this section's all at the back of my truck and it's a full truck. I can't start over there. I'm going to go over here and I'm going to look at where, I'm going to start with what's in the front of my truck because I can get to that. And so now we've just saved your driver so much driving time of getting there and realizing, oh no. So we're making them a lot more efficient, and we're kind of calling out some of the gaps sometimes in DRO, because we've had clients say, thank you so much for doing this. We had literally 3 stops on one street, and one was in the 1,000, one was in the 3,000, and one was in like the 7,500 shelf.
Yeah. Wow. That's huge. I didn't know about that either, Kelly. That's a super cool feature. Okay, let's see. So next question comes to us from Daryl Kelly, who said, living in New York, his pet peeve is people getting on and off the subway at the same time. So I feel like he said it's like a pushing, shoving match. This is kind of like elevator status. This is in your same lane, Kelly, for your pet peeve. So yeah. And the question is, currently the miles on leases for P&D trucks is limited to 25K. Do I know when that number will go up? So I know that they are actively trying to expand that ceiling for the program. So I think, you know, the short answer to that is soon, but I think probably realistic is, I think it could be as soon as 3 to 6 months. And I think it could be as long as 12 months, just kind of depending on how really vehicle inventory and the programs play out. So that would be my speculation, but I would say that's probably what we could anticipate there. Next question comes from a classic repeat guest, Mr. Wonderful. So curious. So Mr. Wonderful's pet peeve is chewing gum loudly, which that is hilarious. And I guess that's true. My mom always used to, this is a Tennessee thing too, but she used to say, like, stop chewing your cud like a cow. She'd be like, you're smacking your gum. That was her like go-to. So I won't do that because I'll never forget that. So I'm not, it's not one of my offenses. But the question here, so a couple questions is, so the first question, and Kelly, I'll see what your thought on this is, but what is the ideal stops per day for a driver?
I think you have to find your break-even point. And I think that there's not one clear-cut answer. I know a lot of contractors, our head of business development is a contractor with about 80 routes, and he believes that you really shouldn't send anybody out with less than 100 stops if you can. That being said, we would want to know a lot of things. I would want to sit down with you and say, hey, let's look at the routes. Let's understand what you're getting paid by FedEx. Let's understand what you're paying your drivers and how you're paying your drivers. And then let's look at your profitability from there. So it really depends. Is it a rural route? Is it a tight in-city route? There's so many factors that I'd hate to give an answer that might, you might go, wait, I can do that. There's always edge cases. So I think it's really from a profitability standpoint, something we need to sit down and look at.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'll just touch on that too, just to give you a sense. So Kelly's absolutely hitting the nail on the head here, that it all comes down to the composition of the route itself. And this is really the beauty of the FedEx model, is that it is built to compensate us equally to make sure boxes get delivered in, rural Nebraska versus Manhattan, right? So FedEx's model is built to allow for that. So you can run profitable routes that do 45 stops a day, and you can run profitable routes that have to do 230 stops a day. So just to give you a sense of how much that can vary, it is all about the geography of the specific territory. And a lot of it is the mileage, but, other factors too, in terms of whether it's, commercial routes where you're doing a dense delivery of, a lot of packages, so that package to stop ratio, where I'm stopping at one stop and it's a commercial shipper and I'm delivering 20 boxes, versus I'm in a cul-de-sac where I'm tossing 1 box at a time per house. Just some of those are the factors that can have a huge implications on what that healthy threshold should be. So it's definitely different for every business and every route, even within every business. But absolutely, you've got a ton of resources, software solutions that are going to help you target that for that particular route. This is something, we look at too, just in profitability assessments on businesses when we're, doing the due diligence in our deep dives for consulting. We look at whether or not each of those routes is healthy or not, based on the composition of that route. So it's a great question. A couple more questions from Mr. Wonderful here is, if you're purchasing a business where the average stops per driver is 80, well, I guess so his question was, is that underutilized, and what should be the goal for that? So I think we've kind of touched on that. So we'd have to see the specifics of that business, Mr. Wonderful. But, Kelly, can you talk a little bit more about how you maybe visualize that, or what the actual dashboard might look like for an operator if they're using a platform like Beans Route, to try to gauge that? How do they access that data, or how visible is it?
Absolutely. So we do have dynamic route optimization. So what I would say is, if you, especially if you're taking over a business or you have a business and you think that you could be doing better, reach out to me. Let's set up some time, because what we can do is we can look at some profitability, which obviously route consultants can do as well. But then we can also run it through our dynamic route optimization and run some scenarios and say, hey, what if we did this? What if we did this? And what if we had longer shift lengths? Would we need less routes? So if we could collapse 2 routes, what would the stops per hour have to be? What would the time of work be? What would the levels be based on the last few weeks of history? And then we can even then further understand some profitability. Does this make sense? What kind of bang for your buck are you getting? And we can help you do some analysis on that so that we set you up for success.
Absolutely. And the last part of that question too, and this is again one we really cover in depth when we're doing a deep dive assessment on a business, but what are some of the suggestions for how you change the mindset of a driver when they are under utilized in terms of productivity? And it's a very strategic kind of multi-tiered plan that we talk this through, just again depending on what it looks like the actual issue is with the business, because it can have implications around culture and management. So that may be what's causing the problem. Your fleet strategy may be what's actually causing the problem with that efficiency utilization on that particular route. It also could be literally driver capability and behaviors. So, they're incentivized to do it, but they're not hitting numbers. What are they doing wrong? So it can kind of be any of those buckets or a few other things, but that is something that we can specifically kind of look at the particular business and say, based on the data, here's what it's showing is likely the problem here, and then here's the specific solution for trying to target that with that particular business. But a lot of times it's strategizing at fleet strategy, and then specific coaching and incentives you can put in place for how to target and essentially optimize. But it's eat the elephant one bite at a time. So you're never going to really go in there and flip a switch and optimize the business. It is a multi front attack that you have to do in phases in order to keep the business healthy and sustain operations in a way that's not going to end you up having service violations or excessive accidents because your drivers are suddenly out there driving 80 miles an hour, trying to hit that. So it's a lot of important pieces, but it's a really great question to be asking and trying to think about how to do that. I know we're already 2 minutes over time, Kelly, but I've got 2 more questions I want to make sure that we hit. So one from Josh Davis, who already answered our question and wanted to know generally if there are a lot of contractors with in excess of 100 routes, just out of curiosity. I can definitely take that. So Fedex does not formally publicize this, but we do have some independent gatherings that we do for specifically what we would classify as large scale contractors as just an opportunity to kind of share some of the unique challenges that you have in an organization, like ours, where we're dispatching 275 trucks and trying to figure out how to deal with, cross-state, multi-state operations and just some of the operational headaches that occur. So there are a lot of over, I'd say 100 route contractors, but the exact number is not formally publicized. But it's definitely, as you scale that number, it becomes less and less. So, and then the last question comes from Danielle, whose pet peeve was totally agreed with Scott from earlier, that their pet peeve is people who litter. So I'm loving these like environmental ones. And the question is on Beans Route for the user side of the program. When a driver is operating, is it integrated with speed limitations? And can you see that kind of change in speed zones? Because this is something that's been a pretty popular conversation lately, with speed limiters coming out as kind of an important part of the next evolution of trucks. But how does your software also integrate with that to try to make sure the drivers are safe?
Makes sense. And I think, with speed, that's a lot of times more of a better kind of telematics question, truly, so that you can track that. So I would defer some of that to your Vetter partner and or telematics partner on that. That being said, for turn-by-turn directions, we do allow our drivers to choose which they want. So if you're using us on an iOS, you have the option for Google, Apple, or Waze if Waze is on their phone. And then if you're Android, you can use Google or Waze if they have Waze on their phone. So if those offer some of that information, then they're going to be able to see it. My honest answer, even they know what it is.
Yeah.
I don't know by being redundant and telling them 10 more times if that's going to slow them down. I think it's kind of a better safety type deal of trying to get that data and correcting in that respect.
Yeah, that's great. Well, we covered a lot of great questions today, you guys. Thank you so much for playing full out in your participation. Kelly, thank you so much for being here to talk about Beans Route and the different services you guys provide and just some of the important questions when you're trying to make that really important decision on tech solutions. So as always, appreciate you guys. We'll be back. Spencer will be back next week. So excited to see everybody. So in the meantime, take care, be well, and we will see you guys next week.